Today is World Menopause Day. It's a global day to raise awareness of the menopause and the support that's available to improve health and well-being. The themes of awareness and support are at the heart of the report that we're publishing today. As with most ideas, the idea for this work came about in an informal chat, a conversation that Tanuj Kapilashrami, global head of HR at Standard Chartered Bank and board member at the Commission, and I had last year. Because of COVID, it didn't involve wine, but it was a good conversation. But in this conversation, Tanuj and I both realised that we knew of women who had made the decision to step back from their roles or leave the workforce altogether because of the menopause. And we were talking about skills and talent in the industry, and we realised that this was an issue that needed more attention. Women are an essential part of the financial services workforce. Nearly 500,000 women work in the sector in the UK in roles at all levels. However, women are underrepresented in the most senior roles, but they make up the majority of employees in other sectors and other parts, such as customer services. We know that the financial services sector faces a growing skills gap. Competition for talent is really intense, and the reliance on highly skilled talent is increasing. So it's clear that employers must act to retain their talented people. Women are most likely to experience the menopause between the ages of 45 and 55. And currently, there are more than 120,000 women in this age group working in the financial services sector in the UK. And the women participating in our research that we're launching today said a quarter of them said they are more likely to leave the workforce because of the menopause. So this is not an insignificant issue. So supporting employees experiencing the menopause to stay and thrive in work needs to be part of any organisation's people strategy. The response that we received to our research just hints at the importance of this issue and also how it's been a taboo for so long. We were overwhelmed by responses to our survey that we launched earlier this year. We had almost 2,400 people respond, and included men and women of all age groups. And our findings today confirm that the menopause can present a real barrier to the retention and progression of women. A culture of silence means the impact of the menopause is hidden and not discussed. Simply put, we are losing talent because of the menopause. With the right support, women may be able to stay and progress in their role. Employers must take action or risk losing talented women at all levels of the organisation. And we recommend taking action in 3 areas. Greater culture, education and awareness. We need to break the stigma of menopause for all employees, men and women. Flexibility in working arrangements. We need to allow menopausal employees to balance their work and other needs in a flexible way. And making simple changes to the workplace environment to help women manage their symptoms. Now, these are simple changes, but our research shows we can have a transformative impact if we implement them. Since launching this research, personally, I've been amazed at the number of women and organisations that have reached out to offer support or to share their story, and there's some shocking stories that we've heard. And we're really keen that this conversation continues. So I'll come back to the themes of awareness and support. Ultimately, greater awareness and open discussion of the menopause, along with the right support, will help to create a better working environment for all employees and, crucially, help to retain those talented and skilled women at the time that the financial services sector needs them the most. Now, I'm very pleased to hand over to Andrew Bazeley, who's the Policy, Insight and Public Affairs Manager at Fawcett Society, who undertook the research. And Andrew will take us through the findings in more detail. Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire, and a huge thank you to Standard Chartered and to the Commission for seeing the urgent need to conduct this research and to support women in the sector. Just before I kick off, I'm going to say a big thank you as well to Molly Mayer, who's in the audience here, who started the research from the Fawcett Society side and has now moved off to an excellent job with the Department for Education, and to Catherine Marin, who did a lot of the field work and other work around the research too. 1 in 10 employees in the financial sector are currently experiencing the menopause. With the sector facing growing skills gaps, retaining menopausal employees is a key part of ensuring the sector has the skills required for the future. That's why Standard Chartered Bank and the Financial Services Skills Commission worked with the Fawcett Society to understand 3 things. Firstly, how the menopause impacts women and trans men in the sector, what this means for the leadership pipeline, And finally, the ways that employers can offer better support. We surveyed over 2,400 women and men in finance and then conducted 7 focus groups and 10 in-depth interviews to understand the changes that menopausal women wanted to see. We found that a culture of silence means the impact of the menopause is hidden. Only 22% of women and trans men who are experiencing the menopause disclose this in the workplace, primarily due to the social stigma. We found that the sector is losing talent because of the menopause, so a quarter of menopausal employees say that their experience of it makes them more likely to retire early. But with the right support, women can stay and progress in financial services. Our key finding on this was that just as employers have taken a key role in breaking the taboo around mental health, including menopause in diversity and inclusion efforts and making simple changes to workplace practices will support women to flourish. There is no universally accepted definition of the different stages of the menopause, but broadly we can speak about pre-menopause, so that's before any kind of transition begins. The menopause transition, covering the years before your last period, when symptoms begin and cycles start to change, also known as the perimenopause. The menopause itself, which is the point 12 months after the last period when menstruation stops for good, although symptoms often don't. And then post-menopause. Menopause usually happens to women and trans men between 45 and 55, although for 12% it happens before 40 and between 40 and 45, and for 4% it happens before 40. Trans men's experiences of the menopause are not very well researched and are likely to vary. To start our focus groups, we asked those who were participating what facts about the menopause they wanted to be better known. Here are a few of them. Some of them will be explored further in the presentation. Menopause can happen to women under 50. The symptoms can last for a longer period of time. It's not just a couple of weeks, a few months, and it's over. They can be decades. Menopause doesn't only cause physical symptoms. For example, while hot flushes are viewed as typical, less than half of our respondents reported that they were bothersome. That's compared to 77% who talked about tiredness, while non-physical symptoms like anxiety and problems with recall were also more problematic for women. Menopause is not the same for everyone. One of our participants said, you can't put everyone in one bucket and say, everyone just get on with it. Some people need more help and more understanding. And finally, that many women don't know that they're going through the menopause. We found a real information gap. Many women who didn't apply for promotion or left the workforce did that because at the time of their decision, they didn't know they were experiencing the menopause. They saw their symptoms and thought perhaps they had a serious illness, such as dementia or a brain tumour, and that's just because of the lack of awareness and information that's available in society at large, and which is something that which workplaces can do something to address. So looking at some of those findings in depth, we found that culture of silence means that the impact of the menopause is hidden. Only 1 in 5 menopausal women and trans men disclose their status. Even fewer of those in senior leadership do so, just 8%. Half of our survey participants feel that the menopause is just not something that you can discuss in the workplace. And this culture of silence has ramifications. Menopausal women and trans men are less likely to feel heard than younger employees or than older men in the same age bracket. They have less open relationships with their managers as a result. Getting into a bit more of the depth of what lies behind that. In the focus groups and interviews, women described social stigma and particularly fears that their abilities would be questioned if they disclosed their status. That was particularly true for those who worked in male-dominated or younger workforces, where anything regarding women's health is too often seen as taboo. Women who wanted to progress at their workplace were particularly fearful of disclosing their status. As one woman explained in the quote that's cited here, there's a fear of saying something because you fear it will affect you. I really want to progress, to move into leadership, and I do feel that this is holding me back. To understand the intersectional impacts of the menopause within the workplace, we held focus groups and interviews with women from different backgrounds. A few of the key findings from that work are shown here. So black women in the financial services sector explained to us that they very rarely work with colleagues who look like them. And they feel that their ability is being questioned anyway. Because of that, they're more nervous to speak out about their experience of the menopause for fear it would further undermine the way that they're seen. With so few black women at the top in the financial services sector, those who become senior leaders in particular, so that they have no one to discuss the menopause with. Asian women describe the different expectations that they can face not only in the workforce but also in the home, and the pressure that they feel to perform at the best for both their employer and for their family. Disabled women explained that it can often be difficult to tell the difference between their menopause symptoms and symptoms of ongoing impairments that they experience. So that adds some extra complexity to their experience of the menopause. While women in the LGBTQ groups, that's lesbian, gay, bisexual and queer or questioning women, who are living with another woman, explained that they experience the menopause differently to women who might be living with a male partner. One participant found out that she was menopausal only when her and her partner were both hoping to undergo IVF treatment to carry a baby. So obviously that added some additional pain and emotional difficulty to the experience of the menopause for her. We find that the sector is losing talent because of the menopause. There is a slide that accompanies this. Oh, there we go. Amid this culture of silence and the impact of symptoms, the menopause is holding back women from progressing and in some cases even staying in work. So asked directly about how their symptoms have impacted on their plans, almost half of women and trans men who are currently experiencing the menopause, that's 47% of them, said it has made them less likely to want to apply for promotion. Some women in the focus groups and interviews who didn't seek those promotions described self-checking their abilities and feeling unsure if they would be able to prove themselves in a more senior role. That suggests a clear role for good management and good policy to offer support during that upward move for menopausal women. In addition, a quarter of employees currently experiencing the menopause said their experiences made them more likely to leave the workforce before retirement. When it comes to taking action, women in our research had a clear message. Just as employers have with mental health, we need to break the stigma around menopause. I want to bring this section in by sharing a positive case study from the report. It's from a middle manager in financial advice who left a high-paying job due to the impact of the menopause. In her male-dominated workplace, where women's health was a taboo, she didn't feel supported or able to discuss the thing that she was struggling with, and as a result left that role. In contrast, the new organisation that she joined had just held an information session on the menopause 2 years previous to her joining. That spurred an organisational effort on the issue. Now there's a policy, there's information available on the intranet, managers receive training, the male D&I lead holds drop-in sessions, and there's a support group that holds menopause breakfasts once a month. As a result, the menopause is discussed regularly, and this has fundamentally improved her life. It's given her the confidence to take HRT, and in her words, I've told my D&I lead that my workplace has given me back my life because they've spoken about it. I think we do quite a lot of work looking at the HR space within workplaces, and there's not always many opportunities to say that you've given back your employees their life, but this is a real opportunity for people working in that realm. So this slide just shows some of the key headings for action that the report advocates in order to challenge the culture of silence. The clear message from this was that this needs to be part of existing D&I and wellbeing efforts, not a sort of separate tack-on, so that they are viewed by all employees as an important element of inclusion and wellbeing within the workplace. Women also told us that simple changes to the working environment and to the level of flexibility available would help them. For example, working from home. It's enabled women to deal with tiredness by reducing the commute, or to control the temperature in their home environments more easily. For one woman that we spoke to as part of the focus groups, the perimenopause had meant that she had a very heavy period. And with no toilet close to her desk in the workplace, she worked more on a sort of shop floor level. She often had no choice but to take days of annual leave when she was experiencing that heavy period. Now that she's able to work from home, that isn't a feature for her. Other changes, like building in breaks between meetings and enabling staggered hours, benefit women experiencing the menopause, but they also benefit all employees. These are currently available for many of the women and trans men that we surveyed, but not for all. So this is good practice that is happening in the sector, but it needs to be extended throughout. The same goes for environmental changes, so things like easy access to desk fans, not making that more complex than it needs to be. Exemptions from hot desking so that women can, I told my wife about the exemptions from hot desking recommendation, and she sort of looked a bit nonplussed at me. I explained that you might set up your desk in a way that supports you to deal with the menopause. You'll have your fan, you'll have post-it notes to deal with memory and recall issues, and if you have to redo that every day, it adds some additional complexity that you don't need. And in addition, providing a quiet pause room so that women can take that time out in a space that's not the toilets, which many women described as feeling a little bit embarrassed about doing so. So overall, these findings indicate that employers don't need to make major changes to the workplace. They're reasonable accommodations, ones that ultimately will benefit all employees. If they show the leadership required to break down these taboos around menopause, businesses in the financial services sector have a real opportunity to aid their employees, to tackle their skills gaps, and to create more diverse and productive senior leadership teams. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for providing us with an overview of the research, and actually, more importantly, bringing the research to life with human stories. I think that's what makes it incredibly powerful. There were so many things that struck with me, but I think the biggest takeaway was the fact that almost 80% women find it difficult to disclose that they are going through the menopause within their workplace. They feel uncomfortable, not supported in doing that. Clearly, there is so much that all of us need to do in this space to create that safe space for colleagues to be able to have that conversation. I am now delighted that we have Caroline Nokes, Member of Parliament, who's joined us today to deliver the keynote message. As chair of the Women and Equalities Committee, Caroline brings a wealth of knowledge and insights on the experience of women and the impact of menopause. In this work, all of us have been really inspired by your work, Caroline, especially your commitment to taking action and your call to employees to taking action in this space. So really, we were delighted that you were able to make the time to speak to us today. Join me in welcoming Caroline. She will deliver the keynote message and then join us for the panel discussion.
Good morning, everybody, and I always feel it's incumbent upon me to start off by declaring an interest as a 49-year-old woman. I was struck, I think it was only the week before last, doing an interview for GB News. I cannot recommend that to all of you. That the male interviewer decided he'd start the interview by asking me about my personal menopause symptoms. Just a handy hint, that's not the best way to do it, but actually it breaks down the stigma. It breaks down the taboo. And I tell everybody this. I have a much older sister, she's 50, and last year I said to her, talk to me about your menopause symptoms. And she gave me, much as Andrew did, thank you, Andrew, a terribly gynecological explanation of the menopause. And I said, no, I get all that. I want to know how it's affected you. Tell me what the impact is. What has this meant to you in your daily life? What has it meant to you at work? And that was a very different story from the cold, hard facts. And she's very lucky. She's a woman who works for herself, who has the flexibility, who can wear what she likes to work. She can have the temperature set as she wants it. And so I now shamelessly exploit her in interviews and tell everybody about her menopause symptoms, not mine, which normally provokes her to phone me from America and say, have you been talking about my menopause on the media again? To which the answer is yes. But, do you know, the research that we've heard about is incredibly striking. Now, look, I work every day in a very heavily male-dominated environment, and I recognise some of the challenges that we heard about from the research. Absolutely. It's hard to talk about the menopause. It's hard to find those safe spaces where you can just chill out, sit down, that isn't the ladies' loo, because let's face it, they are not a very comfortable location. But it's absolutely crucial, whether it's in the city, whether it's in Parliament, whether it's in schools, that we all talk about it, that we break down the stigma. And the research that my select committee, the inquiry that my select committee launched back in the summer, is absolutely about finding the evidence, because we know the anecdote a bit. Not very much. We've heard a little of it because people are afraid to talk about it. But we know that women are not applying for bigger jobs, more responsibility, those promotions. And the evidence that the Fawcett Society has produced for us today tells us exactly that women are not only underrepresented already in senior roles, but they are considering leaving them. Now, from my perspective, that is absolutely horrific, because I spend my entire time touring my constituency and, in this job, a much wider audience, encouraging young women to set the sky as their limit, to make sure that they apply for exciting, interesting roles, that they have the confidence to progress in those roles. And how dare we tell them that when you get to 49, you'll suddenly have that confidence chopped away from you. So crucially important that we break down the stigma, that we make sure that women, who I always say are not yet at the peak of their careers, are given the support that they need to be able to continue in them. And as Andrew said, that can be the very practical and physical. It need not be anything more complicated than a pack of Post-it notes and a desk fan. But actually, it also needs to be about the emotional and mental support. I was stunned, I think is the correct word, perhaps horrified, as part of the evidence gathering for the Select Committee inquiry, to have a senior HR director in a very prominent national firm contact me privately. I said, I can't give evidence to your committee. I'm an HR director, for goodness sake. I should be brave enough to talk to people about my experience. But I have to remain anonymous. I'd prefer it if my evidence remained completely confidential, and actually it's just easier to email you and tell you about my experiences. And too many of the women giving evidence to our select committee were afraid to attach their name to it, wanted it to be anonymised or kept confidential. So God bless Davina McCall, and thank you, Standard Chartered, for having us here today to keep breaking down those taboos and stigmas. And flexibility. Well, I've managed to adopt my own flexibility rules today. I've turned up in the city wearing jeans because guess what? I'm comfortable in them. And I've given up wearing heels and tend to wear trainers to work, although Mr. Speaker has a bit of a view on that at the moment. But it is about making sure that people are comfortable in their workplaces, comfortable in what they wear. And as I've said to leading companies, you know, I want to hear about the good as well as the bad. Those companies which act as role models to others can be absolutely brilliant. And you know, there is a long list. And a couple of weeks ago, this is very naughty. So a couple of weeks ago, I took part in the launch of the Menopause Workplace Pledge. There was a fantastic competition amongst all those present to use the term vaginal dryness in front of the Countess of Wessex. And it got a little bit awkward when everybody felt obliged to talk about it. But there are some fantastic companies. So Tesco's changing their uniform requirements so that women could wear what they want. Some brilliant examples of support from companies like Zurich, like Bupa, who are really working to make sure that the three changes that we've heard about today are put in place, that it's about breaking down the taboo, it's about providing flexibility, it's about providing support and giving women the confidence that they need to continue to progress in work. So I'm going to say one last thing, very bad, shouldn't. Some years ago, there's nothing more boring than somebody who says, when I was a minister. When I was a minister, I used to have to attend the employment workforce. And I was the immigration minister, which is incredibly topical at the moment, immigration in the workforce. But I can remember not the most senior civil servant in government, but one of the most senior civil servants in government, talking about the economy and describing it as menopausal. And there was this horrified silence around the room. And I don't know why, because I was the immigration minister. I was not the chair of the Women Equalities Select Committee. But every face in the room turned and looked at me, and I slammed my hand on the desk and just looked at him and said, "You will not use menopausal as an insult." And he looked at me horrified and came up to me privately at the end and said, "You're right, I'd never thought of it that way. I will never use that term as an insult again." But it shows you how deep-rooted some of those prejudices are, that one of the most senior civil servants in government felt it was okay to term the economy as being menopausal as a term of insult. So that's my job, always, to call it out, to shout it out whenever I see it. We always say, don't we, that in Parliament there are some bloody difficult women. I am one of them. But I think the abiding message I would like to leave you all with, it is sadly still true that many of us, male, female, suffer from a lack of confidence at work. The menopause is one, I was going to say condition. It's not a condition, it's a phase of life that 51% of us will go through. We can't change that. So actually, let us not allow that to be yet one more reason why women in the workforce lack confidence. We need to make sure that we beat down the taboo, we build up those women, and we make sure that those crucial role models, those women between the ages of 50 and 60, stay in the workforce to inspire a whole new generation to follow them.
Thank you very much, Caroline. So many things resonated with me. As the head of HR for Standard Chartered Bank, the first one was encouraging HR professionals to be a bit braver. And many members of my team are in the audience. That's a personal takeaway. But the two other things which I thought were really powerful is We talk a lot about infrastructural support that is needed to make workplaces more inclusive, but a huge part of this is the emotional and mental support. You know, what do we do to make cultures inside workplaces more inclusive? And without focusing on the culture, the infrastructural adjustments will only take us so far. So that was incredibly powerful as well. And finally, the role of role models, and I will touch on that in the Q&A. We've spent the program till now focused on the research, what's the data telling us, what are the stories that are coming up from survey participants. I want to shift gears a little bit now and talk about what can we as employers do in this space. So as employers, as leaders, what is the role that we can play in making workplaces more inclusive? Please join me, Chris and Rebecca on the panel, also Claire. Chris is the regional CEO at first Sentier. Rebecca Park is a senior practice lead at Global Counsel. And Claire, we have all met, so that's going to be my panel discussion for today. Chris, I am going to start with you. What is the role that you think, having heard the research this morning, I know you've been actively engaged in some of these conversations within your own organization, what is the role that employers and leaders can play in bringing awareness on this issue?
Thanks, Tanuj. Well, I mean, first of all, it's a hugely informative and insightful report, and I think the data that's contained in it, Andrew, is extraordinarily persuasive and difficult to ignore, I think, for employers. The fact is, there is a lack of awareness, full stop, about how menopause for women can have negative impacts on their day-to-day experience. And because there's this lack of awareness, there's a stigma. It becomes a thing. People can't talk about it. That's obvious. And because they can't talk about it, they suffer in silence. And that means, on one level, they're having a poor experience, which obviously can't be good. It can be damaging their confidence. But obviously, more broadly, if they're opting out of the workplace altogether or passing up on promotions, as was said, that's a very bad thing. I mean, we all acknowledge that any good business wants to try and foster some sort of positive, inclusive culture so that everybody can be themselves and share their issues at work and all of that sort of thing so they're comfortable, as everyone's noted. But aside from that, there's a basic business case to this whole thing. I mean, the business case is if, as you said, 9% of financial services employees, that's the demographic we're talking about that's most at risk. If 9% of the population that we're supporting is at risk of opting out or not stepping up or being promoted, etc., then we have to do something about it. It's an incredibly competitive industry that we're in. We can't afford to lose talent, and we especially can't afford to lose talent from that particular demographic, because that's the demographic that, Caroline, as you said, we're relying on to act as role models to the next generations of women coming through the workforce to assume roles as senior leaders as well. So it damages all of our approaches to getting gender equality in the workplace. It damages our gender strategy. It compromises it. So I think employers have to react to that. We've talked about awareness. I think we've all got to embrace awareness strategies to raise awareness, to stop it being a thing and turn it into something that's more normalized. How we do that, there seems to be a myriad of ways we can all go about doing it, but that's going to be very, very important. We also have to make sure that we've got appropriate support for women who are going through this as well. And I think, based on some of the recommendations I saw, many of these things should be relatively simple to implement as well, not difficult. So I think from an employer perspective, we need to recognize there's a business case for this. We have to react to it, and we have to get it right. And I would hope, having read the research, the importance of this will be well understood by employers. That would be my view.
Thank you very, very much, Chris. I'm going to come to you, Caroline. You spoke a lot about role models, and that piece really struck with me. And when Claire and I started this work, it was at the back of us speaking to quite a few women who, at senior levels in the industry, who had taken the decision or were taking the decision to opt out. I'd love to hear more on the value of role models from you, and not just women role models, but also male role models in this debate.
So I take a very robust view on this, that if you can't see it, you can't be it. And we are talking about women who will be at director level, senior managers, and if they disappear, as Chris has said, in your sector it's 9%. If they disappear, then the reality is that those younger women following them won't see what they can aspire to, and therefore might never think that they can achieve it. So look, sometimes I terrorise the Prime Minister by telling him that I'm not yet at the peak of my career. I think that makes him very scared. But the reality is that I inhabit a world where there are far too few women, there are far too few people of colour, there are way too few disabled members of Parliament, and when you start talking about intersectionality, and every journalist tells me, please don't, because no one understands it, the stark reality is if you want to find senior black female politicians, you really are down to an absolute handful, a tiny, tiny number. And it translates. I look back at the last election where we saw too many senior women leave for a myriad of reasons, and I'll be completely candid about that. I don't think any of them actually cited to me the menopause as a reason. But actually, when you look at their ages, I wouldn't be surprised if that hadn't played a part. And we are getting better at it. I think my colleague Rachel McLean, now a Home Office Minister, has been really candid about her experiences. But the stark reality is, you know, we in Parliament have to do more. Now, it fills people with horror when I start talking about legislating. And I am not going to sit here and promise that the inquiry that my Select Committee is currently doing is going to necessarily call for more legislation. But it might. It well might. And if it calls to make the menopause a protected characteristic, that's going to put the onus straight into the ballpark of employers to make sure that they are actively not discriminating against menopausal women. And the reality is that I can point at cases where women have been forced to use disability discrimination legislation to bring a case to a tribunal. Now look, the menopause is many things. It is not a disability. It may be an utter pain, it may give you horrific symptoms, but it's not a disability and it's not appropriate that we should be using that legislation. But, you know, I absolutely stand by, as I kicked off with, if you can't see it, you won't be it. And so I always say that about my own role in Parliament. Look, you know, I'm not everybody's cup of tea, I get that. And I also get the fact that I can be particularly outspoken and difficult, and you know, and I would get quite fed up with being forever the angry woman in the room. But I do that so that a whole generation of young women go, you know what? Yeah, she's very visible. We can see that, and so actually we can be it.
Super, thank you very, very much. I should have said this. We will have time for some audience questions, both in the room and for many participants who are joining us online. So for those of you online, you can put your questions on the Q&A feature of Blue Jeans. And of course, I'll come to the audience in the room once we have been through a few more questions to the panel. So I'm going to come to you next, Rebecca. And I met you virtually for the first time last week, and it was such an impactful meeting. I mean, the personal story you shared with me, it stayed with me for a long, long time after the conversation. And I do want to, in this whole session today, we've tried to personalize this. You know, yes, the facts, data, research is important, but ultimately it's the human stories which bring this issue to life. And I'd love to come to you next and share your experience and your story, and what advice would you give to employers as they're thinking about this issue?
Thank you. And what I can bring this morning is probably not much more than an anecdote, and that is a very personal experience of how I found the menopause. And I suppose I should kick off with, I was forced to start a medically induced menopause at 35. I suffer from endometriosis. I hit that point in my treatment where that was the option on the table. So unlike most women, I literally had a calendar date in my diary that was like Tuesday morning, that's when the menopause starts. So I was like, okay. So I read up on this, I was braced for it. And so it wasn't something that creeped up on me. It wasn't something whereby I was accidentally discovering symptoms and trying to figure out what in my life was causing this or why I felt that way. And so in that sense, I felt like I had this rare opportunity to kind of go into it with my eyes open. So I'd done the research, I'd read about the hot flashes, what might happen. I had not anticipated the brain fog. I hadn't anticipated that lack of concentration, that getting into the office, I'd be looking at my budget and staring at it, wondering what on earth it meant and why I'd made those decisions. Something I would have absolutely taken for granted just 2 weeks earlier and never thought twice about, while also doing possibly 2 or 3 other things. And that sounds glib, but it really shook me. It scared me. And I thought, is this it? Is this is the point in my career? I'm not going to go any further. I can't think about my next opportunity. I can't think about my expanded role or what other responsibilities I could take on, because right now I'm struggling to do this. And I hadn't anticipated that, I hadn't expected it. I thought this was going to be something I could manage, didn't need to really tell anyone about, and it would just be part of what all women go through to some degree. And then I realised actually it was impacting how I felt, it was impacting my confidence, it was impacting at times how I felt I could deliver. So I started to talk to a couple of people. And first of all, I went to female peers. Women who were going through the perimenopause or were just on the border of it and thinking that was what was happening. And they were incredibly supportive and sort of said, look, it's perfectly normal, you shouldn't, you're reading more into this than you should be, or it's not as stark as you think it is, but what do you need? How can we help? And actually I realized the person that could probably provide me the most support, that could help the most, was my line manager, the CEO of our organization. And he was, and I'm sure he won't mind me describing him as this, a white, male, mid-50s, middle-class manager. I'm sure he'd never had a conversation in the workplace about menopause ever. And I sat down with him and I said, this is going to embarrass you more than it embarrasses me, which I didn't actually believe at that point. I was definitely the one in the room thinking, I really don't want to do this. And I explained what was going on. And I explained that I was going through the menopause and that actually it was impacting how I felt about work and how I felt I was able to deliver. And I couldn't have asked for a better response. And I'm not saying that's going to be the response everywhere, but actually there wasn't a moment of hesitation in his backing of me and his question, what can I do to help and what can we do to help as an organisation? And that blew me away. It was incredible. There was no embarrassment. There was no, I can't believe this woman's just sat in front of me and done this. It was, okay, right, excellent, right. What can I do to help? Explain this to me. What's going on? And it enabled me to then think, I can talk about this, it's all right, I don't have to hide this, I don't have to pretend that this isn't happening. And at the time, as a business, we were at a relatively early stage in our inclusion journey. We just set up our first diversity inclusion group. I was sort of leading much of that work with colleagues, and one sort of Thursday afternoon, it was a particularly bad day, and I just sort of blurted this out in the middle of an inclusion meeting. Well, what other topics do we need to talk about? Because as a menopausal woman, I think X. And the reaction after the meeting, I wasn't expecting. The messages, the emails, other women in the organisation who sort of came to me and said, you mentioned the menopause in the workplace, and can we talk about that? Can we make it part of our inclusion network? Can we look at the initiatives that are out there? And so a small group of us started talking to various banks and insurers in the industry about what they were doing, what had worked and what hadn't worked, and some of the great initiatives that had been kicked off where people were having conversations. And then the second wave happened, which was it wasn't women coming to me, it was men, married to women going through the menopause, or brothers who wanted to understand what the women and the people in their life were going through, and they didn't know how to have the conversation, they didn't have the tools to open up that conversation. And that's when you realize actually creating that environment in the workplace where you can talk about these things also creates an environment more broadly where we can break down some of the broader social, cultural stigmas that we still have. And I think for me, I became very conscious at that point as I talked to a lot of women who told me about their careers, their backgrounds, their experiences in the industry, the decisions they'd taken to be in possibly more junior roles than they previously had been because of the experiences they were having, that actually I probably felt okay talking about this because of my age. I'm going to sort of put this out there, which is I think so much of our stigma still on the menopause is often tied up with age and how we judge women of a certain age, for want of a better phrase, or how they believe they will be perceived and judged. And actually, because I was able to break that away from what I was going through, and because I was able to kind of put it in a box and sort of like, this is medically induced, this is separate to me hitting 50 or mid-40s or late 50s or whatever it is, it broke one of the most difficult stigmas around this away. And I think we have to be honest about that when we have these conversations, because there are lots of younger women in the workplace who aren't just looking for role models, they're also looking to have the conversations they're starting to have around period poverty and around access to sanitary wear in the workplace and around some of the challenges that they've experienced, and they want to have a more honest and open conversation about. And we could wait for that generation to come through and apply exactly what they've applied to talking about periods in the workplace to the menopause, or we could try and push it through now and make sure that people who are experiencing the menopause at this point in their working life are actually able to have those conversations at home, in the workplace, frankly, in the pub. Because at the moment, I think we're still limited to a very small number of safe spaces where people feel it's okay to talk about this. And from my very small experience, actually, the support can be incredible and it can genuinely change how you feel about it. And there are people willing to be open about this and have that conversation, but we have to get over our own fear as much as anything else, as well as the broader kind of societal judgments that I think are still placed on this.
Thank you. I hope everyone can see the impact this conversation had with me, on me last week, Rebecca. And it's actually what you said which really struck with me. Of course, we are talking about what is it that we can support, to do to support colleagues, women colleagues who are going through the menopause transition. But actually, it's much more than that. You know, it comes down to what kind of employer do we want to be? You know, do we want to be an employer that has a culture that fosters inclusion at its broadest level, where people feel safe to be the best versions of themselves? And you really got me thinking about, if we get this right, actually the prize is so much bigger than the 9%, potentially 9 to 10% of colleagues who are going through the menopause. It's actually creating a much stronger culture within our companies, which I thought was hugely powerful. I'll bring it to skills, Claire. We'd spend a lot of time talking about skills. As CEO of the Skills Commission, you are really, really focused on skills within the industry. What do we need to do to become future ready, future fit? And as you think about the menopause, how do you link it to the skills debate that we've been having?
Thanks, Tanuj. And I think just to pick up on some of the points my fellow panellists have made already, that, you know, if the workforce in financial services is broadly 50-50 male-female, and so we've got this issue that half of the workforce is going to, you know, be affected by it at some point. We can't ignore that. And I do also think, I agree with your point, that it's not only menopause. I think there's 3 M's that affect women, and we only really talk about maternity very openly. Menstruation and menopause really are still taboo issues, but we're focusing on menopause today, and I'm really pleased that we are, because the figures are pretty clear. The work that we've done and the numbers that Fawcett have found is, you know, around 120,000 women in the sector will be transitioning at the moment, or likely to be. And we know we've got issues of early menopause or very early menopause as well. But that's huge. And if we think that the research suggested 25% of those women are thinking about leaving the workforce or may decide to leave early, that's a huge number. And just bringing it back to skills from a business plan point of view, as Chris mentioned, the sector can't afford to lose those people. We've got skills gaps at all areas of the sector, and the sector needs to do everything it can to retain the talent it's got. And the challenge for financial services skills is not just about recruiting new talent and new expertise in, it's actually about augmenting the talented people that we've already got, building their skills. And if we've got a very skilled workforce, we want to retain that expertise. And it's employees at all levels, so it's not just the senior pipeline, senior women, it's women working in customer service roles, claims handling, back office, whatever it might be across the industry. And so the point that someone made about change of uniforms with Tesco, we know that some of our commission members are actually thinking about how they can adapt uniforms within their retail bank branch to support women and make those choices. So these things do apply across the whole industry. And I think that, you know, we've got 32 employers that are members of the commission, and they really do understand that actually taking this action is a good business choice. It is about making sure they can retain and develop the talent that the industry has, because they need to as a business. And I think all the personal stories that come in under that is you know, bonus. We can have that inclusion, that better experience, and that confidence. But I just want to say a couple of things as well. The research showed, and you'll see it in the report, that actually some of these symptoms, tiredness, loss of memory, etc., are actually affect men of the same age bracket, the 45 to 55 age bracket. Not to the extent that it affects women in that age bracket, but men of that age certainly do experience some of these symptoms compared to men of a younger age category, or younger age groups, and women of younger age groups. So in some ways, these changes that we're suggesting will benefit a much broader demographic. It's not just about women. This inclusion can benefit a much wider demographic. And I think the points about the conversations are really important. We heard lots of stories about women not disclosing their menopause status because their manager was a male, and they didn't know how it was going to go as a conversation, so they just didn't do it. Particularly if you're in a less senior role, you maybe have less confidence or currency to do that, and we've certainly talked about that with the researchers. So in some ways, I think we need to put the men in menopause as well as tackle all of these really, really simple changes that we can do to make a big difference to women's lives.
Thank you very, very much. I am actually going to open up. We've got time for some questions, and it's a great opportunity to not take a few questions from the room. So I'll come to the room first. I know we've got a couple of mics handheld mics that are around, and then I will go to questions on the chat. Anyone in the room? Tracy.
Thanks. As a 54-year-old woman who retired from Standard Chartered at the end of last year, this really resonates with me, and I think the research is fantastic, and the findings will be hugely impactful. One of the things that wasn't covered, which definitely impacted me, is that these physical and mental changes that women are going through do coincide with other challenging times of all of our lives, not just women. That could be children going off to university, children having challenges to find work. It could coincide with sick parents or infirmed parents, and all of these things are exacerbated by the mental and physical challenges of menopause. And that's not to say that our partners do not bear the same consequences of the challenge, but the way they deal with them can be different. And so I think the awareness about the physical and mental challenges goes so far. But I think the awareness that at that time of life, when a woman or a trans man is going through, the enormity of that, there's often other big challenges that they're going through that can also impact the decisions that they make about promotions and about staying or leaving work. And so I think the education piece should be a little bit broader than that, and actually having our male colleagues and partners and family members at home really understanding the burden of that, and perhaps taking on some of that burden might also help to help women make different choices. And I would even go as far as to say, maternity leave and extending that to paternity leave and all of the consequences of that have been wonderful and facilitated great change, positive change for women. Maybe we should think about this time of life, that there is a period where women and men could take some time out, because it coincides with an enormous physical, mental change at the time when other challenges are going on in our lives. So a suggestion and maybe a question for any views on that.
Fantastic, Tracy. Thank you very much. I don't know, Caroline, do you want to react to that? Or?
So I think Tracy's absolutely bang on, and some of the research that my committee did, and I think the Fawcett Society did through COVID, I'm going to make an enemy of every man in the room now, demonstrated that during COVID it was women that carried the greatest share of caring responsibilities. That wasn't just about homeschooling, which was hell. It was about looking after elderly parents. I know how challenging it was to go around Tesco's trying to find orzo for my mother. And that's the striking thing, is that you have parents who have got to a certain age, and we all know that their well-being falls off a cliff after 80. You've got kids being difficult in terms of, I don't have a job, so I'm going to sit at home and watch Netflix all day, despite the fact that I'm 23. And one of the things that really struck me when we launched the inquiry was the number of men who came to see me and said, can we also please include something about how difficult it is for men to know how to support their partners effectively? Because we can see that they're going through all these challenges, and they're homeschooling, and they're doing this, that, and the other. And you're dead right, and it's part of the motivation behind why the committee's doing this inquiry. And I can't predict what recommendations we're going to make to government, but I want there to be some seriously chunky ones, so that we can begin to sort of find a pathway through how we can support women staying in their careers at what can be a really, really tricky time.
And I think, Tracy, it ultimately also goes down to just thinking about careers very differently. So this, as the world's coming out of COVID, people are rethinking their choices. Should we be thinking about careers in a very linear way that we thought in the past? And, there will be opportunities where people might want to take a break for a variety of reasons, and can employers position themselves in that space more proactively? So it's a great suggestion, one that we will definitely take away in Standard Chartered. Anything else? Yes, we've got another question.
Thanks a lot. Claire, you mentioned the 3 M's and the maternity, the menstruation and menopause. And it's great that, I think over our working lifetimes, we've seen such a change in response to maternity. It's great we're now starting to address menopause. But how do we get those changes to be quicker?
Good question. I don't know if I knew the answer. I think I'd be able to sell it. I think it's talking about it. We said awareness and support. I said in my remarks that that's the focus. And we don't get change overnight. There were some comparisons made by some of the women participating in the research with mental health. And if you think back 5 or 10 years of the conversation on mental health in financial and professional services, for example, it has moved on hugely. And if someone came to a manager now and said, I'm struggling with anxiety, the response, I think, would be extremely different to as it was 5 or 10 years ago. And I think that's probably the journey that we might be on with menopause. I think we just need to talk about it, understand it. There'll be changes we've made. We want to be action orientated. That's the work of the Commission, and I know Tanuj shares that. So that's why the report, there's a big section on what can employers do. And it's simple. I don't think any of the recommendations are expensive or particularly difficult, but it's just about having that conversation. And I know that some of the members have taken this forward. For example, HSBC have implemented an awful lot of work already to just understand that, and they're really sort of forging ahead on this. Standard Chartered are doing work. So I think just keep talking, mention the M word, get people comfortable with menopause. People are still a bit, ooh, just say it out loud, and let's keep that conversation going, because ultimately we're trying to put it as a business case as well as an inclusion issue, because once we've got both of those, it becomes a business critical. So I think, yeah, everyone's homework, go and have a conversation about the menopause in your workplace today, and that will start that movement.
Any other questions in the room? I know we've got loads joining online. I still can't see any questions coming online here, but let's take one more question. Yeah.
I think it was a really interesting point you made about period poverty, because the generation that are coming through are not going to be accepting if organisations and employers are not going to be mindful and respectful of changes people go through. So I do think unless we make the change now, we're going to have a generation that will disenfranchise with financial services if we don't take the baton and make that change. But also, this is the starting point. This is starting discussions, starting organisations to think differently and tweaking, because we're not talking about radical change. And I think that's what's really interesting out of the research. None of the change is particularly radical. It is just adjusting, which actually some of the changes will help everyone, not just women in the workforce. But I do think unless we all start making that change quickly, the generation coming up will not be as patient, and we can see that. That's a generation that wants change and wants change quickly, and if we don't adapt to it, they will vote with their feet and go to other industries who are more accommodating and more accepting of change. So, I think the changes are really easy to implement, and I absolutely agree. I think just talking about the term menopause is still shocking in lots of circles, and just keeping that language current means the shock element starts falling away.
Can I ask Rebecca, because you spoke about, ultimately it comes down to attractiveness of the financial services sector as an employer. There is the business case around how it impacts the bottom line if you have 50% of your workforce that will go through this phase. But it also comes down to financial services continuing to be attractive as an employer if we are not seen to be leading on these changes, as opposed to these changes being done to us. So I don't know if you had any thoughts or reactions on that.
I think that's right. And for me, I think one of the things I've been sort of challenging and thinking about in that space is almost the different size of employer within financial services. So, a lot of the examples we talked about today, large multinational banks and corporations that are implementing these changes. And, we know they have huge initiatives focused on HR, diversity, attractiveness, and employment, and have often, which is unusual for financial services, been at the forefront of pushing some of these stigmas around previous inclusion initiatives and conversations. And I do think one of the challenges we have is actually, what about the smaller employers in the industry and the smaller businesses that need to address this? I currently work for an organisation where I think I'm probably the first generation of women they've ever had in employment that will go through the menopause. And there's probably only a handful of us right now. So how do they address this? Because I'm pretty sure menopause is still a very shocking word for much of the 20-year-old workforce, but also the management team, they're not yet hitting it in their broader personal lives, and now they've got women wanting wanting to talk about it in the workplace and add it to the agenda. And so actually, how do you think about breaking it down for those kind of organisations so that it doesn't become one of those issues, I think a little bit like maternity did at the start, whereby it was, well, larger employers can deal with this, but smaller businesses don't yet have the bandwidth or the economic capacity to put in place the same support. And I think here, because so many of the solutions are small or cultural and actually not expensive necessarily to implement, pushing that conversation through all parts of the industry so that we are thinking about the attractiveness of employment for a business, but also the ability to implement these changes irrespective of size is going to be a really important part of the way we drive the conversation.
And you started off by sharing your example, which started with your conversation with your people lead. I'm going to come to you, Chris, if you have anything to add to Rebecca's comments.
No, I think I completely agree with Rebecca's comments. I think it should be relatively simple to implement, irrespective of the size of the organisation. And most of the ideas that are in the report are pretty simple. And when we talk about support, and back to Tracy's point, there's a general awareness conversation that we all, as leaders and managers, etc., need to promote. But the support provisions, some of them are physical provisions in the office. That's pretty straightforward. Some of it is very simply about making day-to-day life slightly easier. I mean, we've all been through hybrid working for the last 18 months, and we know that's triggered an acceleration in terms of flexible working. So that part of things should take care of itself relatively easily. And all businesses of all sizes have had to tackle and cope with that. But the bigger one that Tracy referenced is, what if as part of the broader mix, and or indeed just specific to this, I'd like to take a career break actually, just for a year or two, but I don't want to leave the workplace. We need to be open to having those discussions, and that as part of support needs to be part of the brief, I think, for employers to think about.
You said something very powerful to me over coffee. Chris said to me that because he was speaking on this panel and it was known within his firm, he had women reach out to him to share their personal experiences. So it does start off with us breaking the stigma and just normalizing some of these conversations. I was wondering what's happening online till I realized the system wasn't working. Now I'm flooded with questions from the hundreds of people who have joined us online, which is fantastic. I'll pick out a few in the interest of time. Just a comment, it's not just managers who are men who may not understand menopause, but women managers who do not understand it as well. Hence, awareness is not just restricted to the opposite gender, but same gender too, to embrace the changes. Really, really powerful point. And I think we don't want this conversation to be just about women versus men. The reality, it's about awareness at all levels. I don't know if any one of you would like to, Chris.
Yeah, I've got a small anecdote, I suppose, in terms of the conversations we've been having in our company. It came to light in support of the point that's just been made. It came to light that whilst I hadn't had, over the past 10 years that I've been in my role, that many women coming to me to talk about menopause, and until recently, almost none, is the reality. Our previous head of HR, who was in their 30s, hadn't either. And yet our current HR director, who is in that demographic where you're most likely to go through menopause, has had numerous conversations in the space of the first year. So I think that's entirely accurate from our observations in terms of conversations internally at First Sentier.
But I think it's also about tooling and educating managers to have those conversations and look out for it. So as a manager, I've never had children, but I'm very conscious of the need to kind of think about those women in my team who may be pregnant or thinking about having children, and making sure that that is a conversation that we can have at the right time, but also making sure you're looking out for, are you thinking about what additional support you need to provide? And that's the same with male managers across the business. I didn't need to go through that experience to have the training and the education to be able to spot it and think about what I need to do as a manager. I have to admit, personally, it did not occur to me to think about what I needed to do as a manager to aid someone going through the menopause in my team. And actually, it needs to become as normal as that, just as it has on mental health and increasingly on caring responsibilities. Are we looking out for those in our business who have caring responsibilities and thinking about how we can help them? And we have to kind of get menopause added to that list and approach.
There's another one here that I definitely want to pick up. What are your thoughts about these excellent intentions being seen as favored treatment and could actually exacerbate the ageism that already exists? And again, in the spirit of being very open and transparent, when we spoke about this research internally, I had quite a few of our colleagues reach out with a slightly contrarian view. People said, by Standard Chartered leading on the research, by coming out with a series of initiatives to focus on this topic, are you actually creating a further divide in the workplace and making this more of a thing than it needs to be? And there's a question in that way, and I'd love to get reactions from anyone in the back. Caroline, I can see you're itching to
don't. If anyone wants to see a workplace where we thrive on division, they should come to the House of Commons. And just last week, I got flack from a colleague for writing an article which was all about there being more in common than that which divides us. And she described it as dreadful that I'd had the temerity to say that we needed to be kinder to each other. Look, every single day, I will find something in my inbox from, apologies, a white, middle-aged, middle-class man telling me that they are the only discriminated sector of society. And there are people who genuinely believe that, despite the generations of women fighting for equal rights and despite the massive problem that we still have with racism in this country, and despite the massive problems that we still have with homophobia and transphobia. And so, look, I just have to keep fighting against that and keep pointing out the discrimination that exists, coming up with strategies that can help counteract that, and recognising. And I think Tracy's point about ageing and ageism is so relevant, that we still discriminate against people, you know, over 45, you're over the hill. God, there's no hope for me, is there? And you just have to keep fighting the good fight.
I'll just add to that, because I agree, and I think that what we took from the research as well was the real desire from women in the focus groups that the menopause or any support was included in an overall diversity and wellbeing or inclusion policy. They didn't want a separate policy for menopause necessarily. They wanted the measures in a broader policy, because we know that every individual's experience is different, and they will need different types of support, whether they're dealing with ageing parents at the same time as this, or they've got disability, etc. And also, I'll come back, I've said it before, but the indication that the research, and, you know, Andrew's very keen that we looked at men as well, which we did. I'm glad we did, because it did indicate that men of the same age group have some of the same symptoms, not to the extent that women did. But, so any of these measures can support people in that age group as well. So there's potentially more to understand there. But I think absolutely this is not another separate thing for women. This has to be about the broader inclusion.
So look, I'm not going to be able to go through all the questions, which is a bummer, because there are some real gems in here, which I will circulate to the panel. There is one for you as a member of financial services sector. I'm sat here absolutely inspired by you, Caroline Nokes, engaging, able to connect with the audience, a great guest speaker. So I thought we will give some love midway into the panel as well. There are 249 people online who've been posting their questions and comments just to share. Really delighted, and we've had audience from all over the world. There are loads of questions in here which are addressed to Standard Chartered. You know, there are people who've dialed in from Middle East, Asia. People have said where culturally this debate is even behind the curve, and what is it that as employers we can do in that space. And from a Standard Chartered perspective, our view is that we really do want to take this conversation global. And while the research has started in UK in partnership with the Skills Commission, for us this is something that we want to take global, especially in Africa, Middle East, where there is a real stigma around this topic. I'm going to come to you, Chris, again. There is somebody from Odgers who's dialed in online. They are the menopause champion for Odgers, and their view is that it's quite important for there to be a focal point in this voice. Where do you think that focal point should be? Should it be business-led? Should it be HR-led conversations? I don't know if you had a perspective on it.
Yeah, I've got a strong view on it. I think it has to be business-led. It has to come from leadership. Any kind of effective change has to come from leadership. So it starts at the top, and leaders of organisations need to own the problem, is the phrase, and lead all of the awareness discussions, demonstrate and advocate personally, as well as through HR functions, etc. But it has to be the business that owns cultural change, as with any other cultural change we might want to embrace. So, yeah, strong view. It's business, and it's leaders, and it's men, and it's women, and it's managers, and it's CEOs.
Claire, there is a question for you. as a sector, is there more we can do collectively to educate and provide support around menopause rather than individual companies? And is there a role that the Commission can play in getting more sort of collectivism in some of the solutions that we can put in place?
Absolutely. The Commission's very much about collective action. We've come together to tackle the skills challenges in the industry. And this is part of that challenge, making sure we retain the talented staff that we have. So absolutely, I think, we are reflecting on the report, and what we do at the Commission is bring together best practice from all of our members to help everyone progress. We are about action, we are about impact, so we will want to hear from firms that are doing this already, different things that have worked, trying things out, and that conversation is already happening within our membership and our meetings. So absolutely, and I think we can all share that more openly, talk about things, because no one's got it right yet, but we're all making moves in the same direction. So I think there's more conversations to have, absolutely.
A comment there from a 30-year-old man who has put in a comment to say he's a 30-year-old man and really, really inspired by this conversation and wants me to thank the panel. So I'm doing that on his behalf. Well done, you, for joining. That's where the conversation starts. I'm going to end with this theme because I think it's really an important theme as well. My question is about the majority of women who don't want menopause to be public. They feel it is their intimate, private space. How can we make sure that the support that's available is discreet and sensitive, that doesn't push them away and worsen the problem? And the reason I want to end the discussion with this topic is it is not a one-size-fits-all. This is about each individual has got their own set of experiences, driven by their own set of circumstances. And what I don't want the message to go away from this morning, that there is a cookie-cutter checklist, guidance document that everyone can implement blindly, and we are going to become more sensitive to the needs of colleagues. So I do want to end with this question and have quick reactions and parting comments from each of the panel members. I'm going to start with you, Chris.
Well, I think it's an important question because not everybody is going to want to talk about it, is the reality. And again, if we're trying to develop and maintain inclusive workplaces, we don't want to force people to do things that can make them uncomfortable, and it's counterproductive. So I think we've got to find a way to raise awareness across the whole organisation, our organisations, so that individuals can be comfortable talking about it if they so choose, but we shouldn't be putting anybody in a position where they need to. And if they want to raise a voice, and Andrew and I were talking about it just before this all started today, if we're having censuses of our organisation, if we're having engagement, listening surveys, that sort of thing, we should be including questions around this, around the extent to which we're approaching it appropriately as well, and getting suggestions from our people as well about exactly how we should go about it best. I think that would be my quick reaction.
Fantastic. Caroline?
So the reality is that no two women will experience the menopause in an identical way, and no two women will have an identical conversation with their HR department. It's crucial that we have a culture of openness and an ability to have that conversation as and how and when people feel comfortable.
Absolutely, and I think as well, there's two parts to this. There's having this conversation, there's also providing people with the information. And even if someone doesn't want to come and have an active conversation about this, having a portal, having the ability to direct people to where they can go for support outside the workplace, or just to read a bit more to understand it, that can be an important part of the support journey. And I think that can help, particularly where people are experiencing it in a way that is private to them and they don't want to have those conversations, but it might help them understand where they can at least have that conversation outside of work or get some broader support.
And I agree, I think it's about that choice. There were some interesting findings in the research which I'll just highlight, because we found that more women were worried about the stigma of disclosing their menopause status than they were about privacy and it being a private issue. So actually the stigma was more of a barrier to talking about it than privacy. And there was also some interesting things in there around confidence, that actually menopause really affects confidence, but not ability and ambition. Actually, some of the women that are experiencing the menopause have as much or more ambition of men of the same age. So I think it's don't assume what women who are maybe experiencing the menopause want or need. Ask them and have that conversation and provide that safe space so they can have it privately if needs be, or they can have it more openly if they want to do that. But I think it comes back to this awareness and support piece that we've been talking about all morning.
The final comment that somebody put in there anonymously was, this is not about creating another divide, it's actually about bringing all of us together. And I think that's a really good way to end this panel. Thank you very, very much to all of you. It was a fantastic conversation. We could have gone on for another hour, but in the interest of time, I think we'll bring this to a close. Thank you. I think all that's left is for me to say my thank yous. It's been a fabulous morning, and actually a culmination of several months of huge amount of hard work that's been done by loads of people. So I do want to say a big thank you to Fawcett Society for a really good piece of work. And this is the first time we've had such deep insights focused on financial services sector, which I think is fantastic. And I can promise you, Andrew, that this is not going to be wasted effort, that this is going to be taken by us and put into some serious action planning. Also want to say thank you to members of the Skills Commission and Standard Chartered Bank. There are quite a few in the audience, and again, the amount of work and passion and energy that has gone on behind the scenes to put up, to get this event in shape has been it's been actually quite inspiring to see how this topic has really unified everyone. In Standard Chartered, we are committed to building a culture of inclusion that helps all our colleagues bring the best version of themselves to work every day. And we've always felt this is a business challenge, it's an inclusion and well-being challenge. And I think the more we can do in this space will help us become a culture that we are really, really proud of. This is the start of the conversation. There is loads more we can do. I'm really delighted that we've got members of the Women in Finance Charter, some of them who've been able to join this session. And we are in active discussions with them to incorporate findings from the report in the Women in Finance Charter Toolkit. And that's going to be another way where we can get practical guidance and ideas and use that to help the entire sector and not let some of the ideation be done at an individual member level. I guess finally, my challenge, request, ask of all of you in the room, the 249 who have joined us online is let's make good use of this Monday morning. Let's take back the research findings. Hopefully everyone's been able to download the report and actually kickstart some of these conversations in your own organizations. And I think that is where, that is a really great place to start. You know, creating that safe environment where we can have some of these conversations openly is the best place to start. So that's my request, challenge, and ask to all the participants who have joined for the event this morning. Thank you very much to everyone on the panel, to all the speakers, and to all of you for attending the event.